On YouTube, Andrew Miller, Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com, coming back at you all today with a more in-depth preview of the round of 64 matchup for the Texas Longhorns, taking place 2 days from now as of when we're recording. We'll see when I end up getting this up, if it's tonight or tomorrow. But Texas faces the 15 seed Colgate Raiders, the Patriot League regular season and conference tournament champions. Texas themselves a conference tournament champion after beating the 1 seed Kansas Jayhawks last weekend by a very convincing score of 76-56. This game, I think this game has a lot of mystery behind it to me in a certain way, because I think there's a lot of anticipation surrounding Colgate's shooting ability and just like the potential for them to have almost maybe like a Golden State Warriors type night where, I don't know if you saw Klay Thompson last night score more than 30 points and a half, but just see one of their multitude of guys that can stroke it from the field or from beyond the arc, just really heat up. But, it is a really interesting game for a 2 seed versus a 15 seed. I digress before I jump too far into that. What are some of your thoughts coming into the game? Because I did an entire preview already.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw Colgate, you kind of, admittedly, I didn't watch a lot of Patriot League basketball this year, but you kind of throw Colgate into, you always think of Colgate as one of those teams who doesn't turn the ball over. They're fundamentally sound. They shoot the basketball well, and those things are all true. And that can be a challenge because it's going to be hard to get them off their game. Like, Colgate's going to be pretty steady no matter who they play. So that's an interesting factor. 26-8 Colgate team being a 15 seed seemed a little low to me. But then when you look through the bracket, there weren't a lot of bid stealers. Like, a lot of these teams that won their conference in the regular season ended up winning the conference tournament as well. So this bracket doesn't have a lot of, undeserving teams in there, where sometimes 15 and 16 seeds that lucked into a conference tournament title and don't have the full body of work. So I think it's probably a good spot for Colgate. Watched a little bit of them from last year, especially in the game against Wisconsin, to kind of go off. But I think it'll be an interesting test for Texas. They should pass with flying colors. Unfortunately, like you mentioned, there is always that chance that the Raiders just get really hot from deep, and that turns it into a very interesting game. In these type of situations, you never want to be, within 5 points down the stretch, because it always seems to go the underdog's way. And, playing in regional sites, teams or the fans start rooting for the underdog, so it can turn against you pretty quickly. So it'll be interesting. I don't think it's the easiest matchup Texas could have gotten, but if you're a 2 seed and you really think you have a chance of going pretty deep into this tournament, you'll be able to handle a Colgate team pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned, because that you mentioned that Colgate is, maybe a little bit underseeded as a 15 seed. Yeah, because usually you see a team like this, I feel like you see them usually around 13. But, Colgate, the Patriot League is not very good. That is what it is. Colgate, to win the conference tournament, I think beat a 9 or a 10 win Lafayette team. But, Colgate's a team that has found a certain level of consistency under, is it Matt Langell? I believe that's the head coach.
Is it? Yeah, Lang.
Same pronunciation.
I've just read it. I haven't seen it pronounced.
Yeah, I saw it the other day, but it's not sticking. Long day. Anyway, he's led them to, I believe, back-to-back conference titles now, and they've made the NCAA tournament. I think it's 4 years in a row if you exclude the COVID year. So, but they haven't won a first-round game yet. So, that's something that's still definitely, obviously a huge goal for them. But, in terms of the whole seeding conversation, Colgate, like I mentioned in Ken Palm, is the 114th rated team. And if I'm looking at the other 15 seeds, there's some pretty challenging teams there. The one that I wouldn't have wanted to play was Vermont. They've had some upset-minded games before. They're actually only a 10-point underdog against Marquette. That might speak more to Marquette than it does Vermont. Maybe a certain type of Shaka Smart stigma there, but yeah, I mean, I actually don't mind the matchup because, like, I think Texas has played enough good teams in terms of shooting efficiency this season and found ways to deal with that that they should be able to find ways to limit what Colgate's able to do. One of the, I'll dig into this a little bit later. There is a stat that I found that is a little bit encouraging to me in terms of their shooting ability and Texas's ability to limit just Colgate's overall offense, because it's not just shooting. I mean, they take care of the basketball. Like you said, they do a lot of fundamental things well. This is what I will say in terms of like my feelings about this matchup at this point is that Texas, I think the only way they can really lose this game beyond Colgate just having like a once in a decade type shooting night is that if Texas really is just overlooking this game. That's really it, because I think at this point, with you getting Timmy Allen back, Texas's bench, it just gives them a huge leg up in March. And so, finding some of the momentum they have lately, getting different sources of scoring like they have lately, there's just too many ways for Texas to be able to win this game that if they do lose, there's an issue. But let's take a look at some of the matchups here. From top to bottom, Colgate has a pretty impressive starting five. They're the only team in the Patriot League, I do believe, with maybe it's not all five of the starters, but they're the only team in the Patriot League with 5 players scoring in the double figures this season. So they have a lot of different guys that can get it done. You mentioned a few names from the top, but in terms of guard and wing play, they're very solid. They move the ball really well, and there's a number of different guys that can stroke it from deep. They have 4 guys, I believe, shooting better than 40% from deep on the season. 5 guys shooting at or better than 37%. So a lot of impressive shooters on this team. What are you thinking about the matchups for this one?
Yeah, I mean, they move the ball really well. That's what becomes apparent when you are watching them on tape. The one thing that I'll note is, going back to the Wisconsin game last year, is once it got really into the thick of it in the second half, you could really see an athleticism difference. And that's against a Wisconsin team that, for the Power 6 level, isn't seen as one of the most athletic teams in the country. Texas, on the other hand, is very athletic. We know that. And I think that's going to be a problem for the Raiders. In order to beat a team like Texas, you're going to have to shoot really well. You're going to have to turn them over a bunch. Just kind of getting away from the matchups and more just overall feel on this one. I've struggled, I know, throughout the season to fully trust this team just because I've been spurned by Texas basketball before. But if you don't trust this team after the last 4 games they've played, with the regular season win over Kansas and then those 3 games in the Big 12 tournament, I really don't know what to tell you. Veteran backcourt, seniors, 5th-year seniors all over the roster, like you mentioned, the depth. This is a team that's built for March. And I think Colgate, if they'd clip a team, it would be a younger, kind of freshman-led team. So I think just overall, matchup as a whole, the Raiders are probably kicking themselves because, one of their big pluses is how much experience they have. Texas has just as much, if not more, experience. So I think that favors the Longhorns. Specific player matchups, I mean, Tucker Richardson is a guy that I've talked about on the site. Going to go into him a little deeper. If you're watching this, probably have another piece out. But he was the Patriot League Player of the Year. Kind of do-it-all combo guard wing. Averaged 14 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds. Really good passer. Looks to switch the floor with the ball whenever he gets it, which moves the defense around, creates some chaos, and leads to a lot of those open threes. I think the Texas length is going to be able to make up for that. I don't think some of these passes you see him make against a Lehigh or a Lafayette are going to be able to get through guys like Dylan Mitchell or Serge Rice, even Tim Allen. So that's a good sign for Texas. I don't think that Colgate's going to get a lot of good looks from deep. I think the game plan is going to be to run them off the point line, try to, see what they can do if they can navigate their way into the paint. That's certainly an advantage for Texas. Colgate runs a four-guard, four in, one out, or four out, one in kind of system. They do have two big guys, 6'10" Keegan Richards and 6'11" that they rotate. I don't think that should scare Texas too much, though. There's no one that you're really going to throw the ball into on the block, and he's going to destroy you. I mean, Keegan Richards is a good player and can function with his back to the basket, but he's not going to be able to score possession after possession. So I'd like to see the Longhorns try to run Colgate off the three-point line, force them to put the ball on the floor, and make plays that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a fair point for the front court matchup. Keegan Richards is a guy that is an extremely efficient paint scorer, but the way Dylan Dessou's been playing lately, I mean, the way Christian Bishop has played in the last couple of games as well, Texas should be able to match up well enough in the front court that they should be able to take care of business in that regard. Yeah, I mean, size-wise, I'm not really worried about this matchup. Texas has faced a lot lengthier teams than Colgate. Excuse me. Colgate is, like you said, a very experienced team, though. Outside of Braden Smith, it's just all seniors in the starting five. Even coming off the bench, it's pretty much all juniors. So a lot of games under these guys' belts. And, I mean, Colgate's going to be coming into this game with plenty of confidence. What is it? They've won like 17 of their last 18 or 18 of their last 19, something in that ballpark. Really, once Patriot League play began, they were pretty much unstoppable. Their only loss was a 1-point loss to American. But I think the one area where Texas can really win this game, like if you come out of this game and you look at the score sheet and Tyrese Hunter and Marcus Carr have twice the number of points Braden Smith and Oliver Lynch-Daniels, then I feel really good about Texas being able to win this game. The wing play, it will be important because, I think probably the most fascinating matchup of this entire game is going to be Tucker Richardson versus whoever's playing the three for the Longhorns, whether that's Serge Rice or Timmy Allen. Sorry if you mentioned this already. I am just, like I said, kind of fried in the brain today, but it's just the defensive matchup is so different when you're playing against Serge Rice versus when you're playing against Timmy Allen. Serge Rice, he plays a brand of defense that is pretty solid on ball, but he might not be the most disruptive guy in the world. He just knows where to be. Whereas Timmy Allen has been playing with some real defensive chops this season, some tenacity on ball that I really haven't seen out of him in years past. And obviously he's longer than Serge Rice, but with the way that Timmy Allen plays, he can expose himself to some risk for fouls. And I don't know if the leg injury is going to be slowing him down at all. I'd presume not. I think that's why Texas rested him last week. But I think that wing matchup is going to probably be the most interesting one. But this game, I think, for Texas can be won in the backcourt and will be won in the backcourt.
Yeah, and I think to ease some of Texas fans' concerns, we talk about how good of a three-point shooting team Colgate is. I mean, they're number one in the country in three-point percentage at nearly 41%, which is crazy in and of itself. But this offense functions kind of within itself. They shoot that well from three because of all the open looks they get. You don't have to worry about a player going nuclear like Steph Curry did in 2008 or Max Smith has done in the past for Oral Roberts. They really don't have that guy on this team who's going to step over half court and pull like Jimmer Fredette. So in that sense, that's a plus for Texas. Because if the Longhorns stay within themselves on the defensive end, force Colgate, to swing the ball 25 seconds every time down the floor, they're not going to get as many good looks as they've been getting in Patriot League play. I think Colgate will be ready for that. It'll be interesting to see what kind of wrinkles they throw in early. But you mentioned the backcourt, the two duos, and how if Carr and Hunter finish with more double the points of Braden Smith and Oliver Lynch Daniels are going to feel pretty confident. I mean, if that happens, I think Texas winning this game by 25. I think there is also a strong path where you can see, not a strong path, but for me, Texas has a lot of paths to victory in this game, is what I'm getting at. I think you could see Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter, combine 5 for 20 from the floor, and Texas still win this game by 10 points just with, how many deflections and steals they're able to force and just the pressure they put on Colgate. I don't think that the Raiders are going to be ready for the length and the athleticism that Texas displays. I keep going back to it, but that's what makes me pretty confident in this matchup compared to the 3-14 against Abilene Christian a few years back. Just the experience and the athleticism that Texas has, I think is going to be too much for Colgate in the end. I don't, see a path. I know people always say, what's the path for the underdog? I don't really see a path unless Colgate shoots 15 or 25 from deep, something ridiculous like that.
Yeah. I like that you bring up that point because I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I had a stat I wanted to mention that was pretty interesting when I was going through some of the shooting numbers more in depth and situational for Colgate over the weekend or after Selection Sunday. So, I was obviously curious to see where Colgate's doing most of their damage, and you've highlighted quite a bit of it. I highlighted some of it during the video that I posted on Sunday. Colgate is averaging almost 1.5 points per possession this season on unguarded catch and shoot attempts, which catch and shoot attempts make up roughly half of their jump shots make up a little more than half of their possessions. Of that, 3/4 are catch and shoot. So it's a whole lot of spot up and, 1 or 2 passes, get an open look. Like you just mentioned, swing the ball around until you find an open man kind of is their MO this season. On unguarded catch and shoot attempts, which encompasses around 1/5 of their possessions. They are shooting the ball at a clip of 48% from the field. And then let's see here, 48% from 3. On guarded, and by the way, in terms of points per possession, that ranks in the top 10 in the country. When they are guarded, they are shooting 33% from the field, 32% from deep, and averaging around 0.9 points per possession. That is good for the 60th percentile in the country. This is not a tough shot-making team. You illustrated this point earlier, but those numbers right there showing how much, on a consistent basis, how much Colgate has struggled against teams that tightly contest on defense versus teams that, might be a little bit slower on their closeouts. And so that does make me feel good. The other thing is in terms of guarding them, you have to take care of the corners. They're about a 45 or 50%. I think it's around 50% shooting from the corners in their last 10 games from deep.
Yeah, and I think Texas is going to have the ability to be aggressive in the corners, on the wings, just above the 3-point arc, because they're not going to have to worry a ton about Colgate crashing the glass. Even if they do, that's advantage Longhorns. And if the Raiders send 3 guys at the offensive glass, Texas is going to be able to score a lot of points in transition. I would assume that Colgate is going to leave their big man, whether that's Records. They're going to leave him down low to see if he can get a tip in, and all 4 of the other guys are going to be getting back on defense because Texas has shown its prowess and how they like to run and how they can be effective in doing so. So I don't think you're going to have to worry a ton about offensive rebounds, and that just allows you to be even more aggressive and extend your defense a little bit. I think just to bring this up, the one game, Colgate played 2 games against NCAA tournament teams this year. They lost to Vermont by 1 point back in December, Also back in December, they traveled down to Auburn, and they got pushed around by the Tigers, 93-66 final. The Raiders were even able to knock down 8 of 18 three-point attempts. So, I mean, they shot pretty well above their season average from deep and still lost by nearly 30 points to the most comparable team that you can get to Texas on their schedule. Auburn and Texas are by no means very similar teams, but in terms of athleticism and talent, that's as close as Colgate played this year, and they just couldn't hang on the floor. Tucker Richardson, 3 for 14 from the field. Watched a little bit of those highlights, and every shot he was taking was a tough one. And he can take and make, off-balance tough shots, but when you get a hand in his face every single time, I mean, obviously that field goal percentage is just going to continue to dip like the numbers you just mentioned. So I think that in general just kind of shows the athleticism difference and how much it bothered the Raiders. And I've mentioned this over and over. I think that's going to be a key difference on Thursday night.
I think there's a lot of ways that you can analyze this game. It is weird, though. Do you get the sense at all that when we're facing Colgate that, in certain ways that this is a team that, in terms of style and approach, is kind of similar to Texas under Rodney Terry?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I haven't thought about that, but yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. They don't really have, if a Rodney Terry offense is looking like it should, everyone on the court, all 5 guys are going to get involved, and that's what Colgate does well. I think, Terry wants to, and we've heard him talk about this in post-game press conferences, especially over the past week and a half, but he wants to be more aggressive and preaches defense more than Langell does for the Raiders. But, yeah, that's an interesting thought. I think the best version of the Texas offense is kind of what Colgate runs, except with, better players. That's an interesting thought. I would probably agree with that, which is another reason advantage Longhorns, because you have those better players to run what Colgate's trying to do.
Something I think is pretty interesting to go over here. This right here is the team rankings round survival odds. It basically shows, based on certain matchup odds, matchup analytics, different situational odds as well, what the percentage chance is that each team makes it to the next round in the tournament. If you see here on the screen, obviously Alabama, Houston, just I think to some degree in terms of ease of path, they have the best chance to not only win it all, but they pretty much have the best chance to advance at every turn. Houston just, I think, with making the round of 32, has slightly lower odds than some of the other higher seeds. As far as Texas is concerned, I think it's interesting that Texas only has an 89% chance to make it to the round of 32, which is barely the second lowest odds, but still kind of in the ballpark of Arizona and UCLA. But then once you look from there, Texas actually has a pretty clear path. If you look over at the odds to make the Final Four, Texas actually has the best chance of any 2 seed. Actually, the best chance of any team that's not a 1 seed. So, if Texas can get past this game, their path looks pretty solid.
Yeah, immediately looking at the bracket, when it came out, obviously you looked at that second round matchup against possibly Texas A&M. Most people say they're one of the most underseeded. With what they've done recently, I think you can certainly argue that. I think you can argue it the other way as well. Started the season off 6-5 with a few horrendous losses. So I think a 6 or 7 right where they should fall. But either way, if you get A&M or Penn State, 2 very hot teams that are going to be tough to beat, good guard play, something that stuck out to me, even on the lower seeded teams like Northern Kentucky and Kent State, Drake, all these teams have good guard play. So what would be an advantage for Texas against a lot of teams with their backcourt of, Carr, Hunter, even throw Rice in there, it's going to be neutralized a little bit in most matchups throughout this region. Texas still probably has some of the better guards in the region, but it's not by much. And if you face a team like Houston with Sasser and Shed, or even Miami with Isaiah Wong and Nigel Pack, the guard advantage is probably going to lean the other way. Xavier, Sule Boom, and Colby Jones, I'd give the guard advantage to the Musketeers. So it'll be interesting what Texas has to do. I will say that looking, at this, they're the most consistent team in the region. I would even say over Houston. Obviously, Houston, what did they finish? 31-4 or 30-4, something up there. You say, how is Texas more consistent? I mean, we've seen some clunkers from Houston this year, losing to Temple, 3 or quad 4 loss. Obviously, they didn't have Sasser in the AAC tournament final, losing to Memphis, by pretty handily by 10 points. Andrew, you mentioned off air, they didn't look great in the quarterfinal AAC matchup against ECU. So because of that, I think Texas is the more consistent team. Consistency normally wins out in March. But it can also kind of rear its ugly head when you play a team that has a really high ceiling, really low floor, and they're playing really well on their day. So what sticks out to me in this region is there really is going to be no walkover for Texas. They're going to have to play well to win every game. With that said, like I mentioned, consistency wins out in March. And that is why even, it's really hard to separate, our coverage of Texas and, our underlying fandom of the Longhorns. If I try to be as unbiased as possible, I would have the Longhorns advancing out of this region. You see it from a lot of pundits and, a lot of national college basketball analysts are picking the Longhorns to make the Final Four. I think rightfully so. And, trying to be as unbiased as possible. I know if you're watching this far into the video, you're probably a UT fan, but I think the Horns have a very strong chance to reach the Final Four. And, it shows that on your team rankings that are listed up there right now. Like you said, the 5th best odds to reach the Final Four. Can't get much better than that as a 2 seed.
The Final Four, I've never really felt this uncertain about my Final Four picks like ever. I think that there's also just been more parity in the top 10 this season than we've really seen in a while. And so, there wasn't a dominant Duke or North Carolina or Kentucky team. Kansas was dominant for a good portion of the season, but even then, they, like I talked about it ad nauseum, got beat by 36 points by Texas in the previous 2 weekends. So, it's just sown these seeds of doubt in my head, but I think that's what makes this fun. I'll let you go first on what your Final Four predictions are.
Yeah. So out of the South, I have number 1 overall seed, Alabama Crimson Tide. I have them matching up out of the 5 seed from the East, the Duke Blue Devils. I know that's been a little bit of a popular pick, but it's all coming together for Duke right now. I do have Texas coming out of the Midwest as the 2 seed. I have them squaring off against a team they've already played this season, the 3 seed out of the West, Gonzaga. I then have Alabama over Duke, and I have Texas over Gonzaga once again. And I have the Crimson Tide over Texas. I think it'll be a close game. I think having Brandon Miller for the Tide just proves to be a little too much. The Nate style of basketball, shooting all those threes. People think it'll eventually catch up to Alabama. I think this year is a little different because of how well they play defense, so they can kind of absorb some of those, inevitable cold spells they'll go through on the offensive end. But yeah, I actually do have Texas going. It feels a little weird to say because, I'll always make a bracket with Texas going far, no matter if they're a 2 seed or an 11 seed, but to actually fully believe in this team to make it all the way to April 3rd in Houston, a little weird. And you never know with this tournament. They could lose on Thursday night, hell. But I really trust the team and I have them taking it all the way to Houston, but getting toppled by Alabama in the end.
Okay. I'm looking back on it. At the beginning of the season, I need to take a look at who our national champion predictions were, because I think I said North Carolina.
That would be cool to go back and look at. I would be really interested in to see those, honestly.
I know.
I think
Yeah,
I might have said Creighton. Which is not looking like a terrible, an interesting sleeper 6 seed, but I'm not very intrigued now that you said that.
not as bad as UNC, but yeah, I'll go and I'll go and bring this up. Just try to see if I can find it in the background while I'm going through my picks. I always do different brackets, and so I think this is just like my heart of hearts, what I think. And there's some of these picks that I'm more confident in than others. The Midwest and the West, I have my picks. That I know. The South and the East, I'm not as sure. I'll start with the ones I'm sure of. That I'm more sure of. The West, I actually like UCLA. That might not be a popular pick, but I know that it's once they get to this, if and when they get to the Sweet 16, that's a pretty grueling run that they have. Potentially either TCU or Gonzaga, more than likely, and then Kansas, maybe UConn, St. Mary's could, but UCLA. I mean, we always talk about guard play, and UCLA's had some good tournament runs lately. They've been a pretty consistent pick in March. I like them. I do like Houston. I think Texas will make the Elite Eight, but I do like Houston to make it out of the Midwest. Out of the South, I'll go with Alabama just because I feel like you at least have 2 or 3 1 seeds in the Final Four every year. That's my reason. I don't like that pick, but it is what it is. And then, yeah, I'll go with Duke. I didn't want to be basic about it, but I'll go with Duke.
Yeah.
I used to live on 15501, so I'm from the Triangle, so I'll rep for home.